If you've been reading a lot of battle shonen and they all feel kind of soulless and you just don't know what to read next, I really do think that D.Gray-Man is worth your time. Now, I did read 8 arcs. I mean, the arcs are pretty small in comparison to a lot of longer running shonen, but still, it's 8 arcs, so that's quite a bit to get through. Up first is the introduction arc, and it does everything that a prologue arc really needs to do. The first big one is you get introduced to Alan Walker as a protagonist, and I will go ahead and say, without too much context, at least right now anyway, I'll talk about it more later, Alan Walker as a protagonist, I can see why so many people love his character. Everybody wanted him in Jump Force. I know, a little bit of a throwback to even talk about that absolute disaster of a game, but everybody wanted him for that game because he was an assist in J-Star's victory. I think there's an ultimate at the end of that, but I'm not too sure. But basically, a lot of people love Alan Walker, and just based off of the introduction arc, the prologue arc, I can 100% see why. But aside from just him, it just introduces the core concepts and key players that are going to play a very active role in this manga. We get introduced to the Millennium Earl, which, based on these first 50-something chapters, he's going to be the overarching antagonist. So you get a little bit more than with a lot of manga, because not even in Naruto or Bleach do we get a look at Madara or Aizen, or even a mention of either of them as far as I know. And even with the Akuma, their introduction, the execution of it feels very similar to that of Hollows in Bleach. I think that's a very surface level, but a very easy to understand comparison between the two, because they really do feel similar. I guess maybe the atmosphere around them or something like that, but especially because of the fact that if you think about it, Soul Reapers are just kind of exorcists anyway, which is what Alan Walker is. He's an exorcist. So I think that comparison is very valid. But as for the overall quality of this arc in terms of its writing and stuff like that, I think that Alan Walker, for most of the early game when it comes to D.Gray-Man, he does kind of carry. I mean, there's a lot to appreciate here, but Alan Walker is the best part about this manga, or at least so far for me anyways. And then something I almost forgot, at the end of this arc, the prologue arc, we get introduced to the Black Order. This is a group of exorcists, or at least an organization is probably a lot more accurate way of describing it. But here we get introduced to characters like Lena Lee. Obviously my pronunciation with that is not up to snuff at all, but also most prominent when it comes to the next arc in the series is Konda. So just keep that in mind. I'm not going to talk too much about the Black Order yet. Now up next is the Ghost of Mater Ark. Now saying Mater sounds kind of hick to me, so the pronunciation on that might be a little bit off, but who knows, maybe I pronounced it right. But overall, this arc I think is kind of one of the weaker ones. We do get to see some cool things going on. I think Konda, the most prominent other exorcist that we see here that Alan Walker gets paired up with, their dynamic I think was pretty great. Like, I did have a good time reading this arc while the two of them were on screen together, just because it is that kind of standard dynamic between a cold and a very pure character. Because Konda, the type of character archetype that he is, I feel like I know his entire character arc just based off of this first interaction. The Akuma end up progressing in this arc, because in the prologue I made the comparison that they're pretty much hollows, or very low level hollows, to the point where they don't have a personality, and the protagonist of the story, whether that be Ichigo or in this case Alan Walker, slays them very easily. Alan Walker struggled a little bit more, but that's because he was protecting someone, so it made a lot more sense. But here we see a new level of development for the Akuma. It gains personality, a very sadistic personality. I think the best comparison, if I'm going to keep it going with the Bleach comparisons, and I definitely will because it makes the most sense, this Akuma can feel very similar to that of a character like Grand Fisher. Now, there's no personal significance that exists between Alan Walker and this Akuma like there existed between Ichigo and Grand Fisher, but still I think that is a pretty important development in the story, and I think it's worth noting. Now, I already mentioned that I don't really like the narrative of this arc. It's not the worst that I've ever read or anything like that. It's a very small arc, and it is definitely hard carried by character dynamics, and specifically, once again, Alan Walker. But still, I don't care for the narrative, and I care less for the inspiration behind the narrative. I'm going to go ahead and just read it off for you. This is an afterword by the author, and it's pretty creepy. She loosely based this story on a play called The Heavy Burden of Love. It's about an old man who falls in love with a young maiden. Now, that phrasing is not it. It sounds gross. Now, maybe the play is super artsy and that's why she likes it, but given the context of the manga and the old character that exists here and the young maiden that's here, like I said, it just does not do it for me. Now, maybe it's not that big of a deal, and maybe the play is super artsy and it's not really meant to be taken that way. That's not really the point. It just seems gross, just off rip without looking any deeper into it. And on top of that, like I said, the narrative here just feels a lot weaker, and this inspiration just does not help, in my opinion at least. Now, the destruction of the Black Order attempt arc sounds very dramatic. It's not. It's a comedy arc. It's pretty funny, but of course, like I said, it's a comedy arc. It's very short. I think it's only like 2 or 3 chapters long, so there's not really much to talk about other than the fact that it was genuinely funny, and it gives a lot more personality to members in the Black Order who didn't necessarily have too much to really pull from in the arcs beforehand, which were only 2, so like I said, it just gives a little bit more personality to the Black Order. The Rewinding City arc is kind of just a Groundhog Day arc, so it can feel very episodic from that perspective, but in reality, this is one of the most significant arcs in terms of its plot developments, because here we get introduced to the Noah family, and I do think that there may be a future problem here when it comes to power creep, because this is something that affects all battle shonen, because Alan Walker, in terms of other members of the Noah family, he gets absolutely bodied every single time. So I do see a future problem with power creep, and that does happen in this arc. Him and Lena Lee both get bodied. Even with that being the case, this is one of my favorite arcs from just a fun narrative perspective, and I really like the character of Miranda, who plays the very central role of the story. In fact, we actually start out from her perspective. So like I said, I really do enjoy this arc, and on top of that, it does happen to be very significant for the first 50 or so chapters of D.Gray-Man. The General Jaeger, and I do think it is Jaeger because it is spelled different from Jaeger, but the General Jaeger Falls arc is very short, but it is very important. I think it's only a couple of chapters, but it does decide the direction of Alan Walker and where he's going to go now. Now he has to find his master, who is a general, General Cross. So that is his new purpose now, which he was kind of purposeless before, so it is nice to have a general direction for our main character. Now, you might expect the story to be less episodic from this point on, but the next arc you get is the Vampire of Oldcastle arc. And I absolutely love this arc, despite, the beginning kind of sounding like a complaint. It really wasn't, because this arc was a ton of fun, having this kind of Dracula-esque arc with a Dracula-esque figure. I think it works perfectly given the setting, the tone, the theme, the atmosphere of this story. Like I said, I just think it works perfectly, and there are some attempts at subverting expectations, and I think the whole thing works, even though it is a bit obvious, and I don't actually think it was an attempt at subverting expectations when it comes to the execution. It's kind of just on a conceptual level. That's where the subversion is. But like I said, I love this arc. But then ending off on the highest note is the Order in Crisis arc and the Fallen arc. I'm going to be combining them because that just makes the most sense. It's like having Water 7 without Enies Lobby. But I think when talking about this arc, there's no better way to talk about it than bringing up the afterword of the author, because she puts it so elegantly. I am going to be reading this word for word, so I would 100% recommend reading these afterwards, because they give so much more context to the story and the author behind the work. The story of the Fallen One turned out to be very tragic. Drawing it took a heavy toll on her emotionally. However, this isn't the story of a traitor, but of a man who loved his family more than anything. A man who was forced to make terrible choices. Don't hate Suman, pity him. Now, something that I absolutely love, significant aspects of D.Gray-Man that I absolutely love, is the artwork and its paneling. Now, its artwork is what got me into the series to begin with. Seeing some of the out-of-context panels that take place a long way away from where I'm at right now just absolutely blew me away. It's definitely, without a doubt, within that upper echelon of artwork within Shonen manga. I'm not saying it's the best. It's the best that I've seen, but I imagine that there's some out there that will compete with it and might even be better. But what I'm saying is it's in that top tier of artwork. Now, the paneling is where I get kind of a nerd about things, because the paneling is super important and I don't think really anybody ever talks about it, because it does help determine the pace. Now, talking about pacing in manga is a little bit weird, because the whole thing is you kind of pace yourself in stories that do kind of have very large exposition dumps, something like Hunter x Hunter, or a lot of unnecessary dialogue like One Piece. You can choose to just skim over or even skip over the whole thing. That is an option. You can't really choose that in anime unless you decide to put it on 1.5 or 2 times speed. But like I said, mostly in manga, you pace yourself. But with paneling, that controls the flow of the entire story. Page turners, stuff like that. There's multiple different techniques to use to make your story flow better. And I think that One Piece in comparison does a horrible job of this. I talked about it in my last video if you want to get a little bit more in depth into that. But D.Gray-Man does not suffer from this problem at all. I think in its more somber moments, that mixing in with the facial expressions and the artwork, I think it just works incredibly well in the more introspective moments. But obviously, this is a battle shonen, so how well do the battles and how well are they paced? I think it is done very well. It's not the best that I've ever seen. I think Naruto, Bleach, and Dragon Ball do fights a lot better. They're a lot more dynamic, but D.Gray-Man is still very good when it comes to its fight. So I think that that is definitely something that is commendable, and given that I've seen artwork and specific pages that take place later on, I'm really looking forward to how this author steps up their game, because the later chapters look absolutely amazing. Now, talking about the characters more in general, and obviously first up is Alan Walker. Now, I talked about him a bit, so I'm not going to talk about him too much right now, but Alan Walker is an absolutely phenomenal, might be a bit much, but he's definitely close when it comes to just character writing. Like I said, he hard carries the series in that aspect, and I think he's probably the biggest plus is the fact that he distinguishes himself from other protagonists within the shonen demographic. To make a comparison, that's not the big three. I've been reading a lot of Blue Exorcist, and I think that Rin does a poor job at this. So given the fact that Alan feels very much on his own, and the fact that it does seem to be a pretty big intention when it comes to the author to really do this and write a specific type of character that's not necessarily in line to what's popular in a lot of modern, or at least classical shonen, because you have to think about this in the lens of the time it came out. Alan Walker does feel a lot different from the rest of protagonists, and I think this is the most appealing aspect to him. The fact that he is so distinct and different, but at the same time, he is very, I don't want to say relatable, because I hate to hear that when people are talking about a main character, but he's very kind and he's not obnoxious. And I think that's what the author liked about him. I think that's what the audience that really connected with D.Gray-Man liked about him as well. But then there is the Millennium Earl, who is supposedly the big bad of the series. I've seen a lot of people hyping him up, but to be honest, there's nothing really to appreciate about his character yet, other than the fact that he is based on a real historical figure, that is not named. And this has obviously led to theories, and going down the little bit of a rabbit hole I went through, it's either Count of Saint Germain. That's probably not pronounced right. It is French. I'm American, so do not expect competency when it comes to the pronunciation here. And then there's Nicholas Flamel, and I'm not sure which one it is. I'm leaning towards the first one, but like I said, I'm not sure either way. I don't really know too much about the Millennium Earl's past, but that is a fun fact, so there is something there. Now, I have already talked about the Black Order, and I have criticized the fact that I don't really think it's that interesting of an organization, and this does apply to the members within, but there are some significant members that I do think I should take the time to talk about. The first up is Lena Lee, and I know I butcher that every single time I say that, so please correct me if I get it wrong, but she's Chinese. She is the only member of the order that seems to be Chinese, and there is a little bit to go off of when it comes to her character, because there is a setup here where there's a lot of darkness and mystery involved with her character, but personality wise there's nothing there. Like, I don't really like her character that much, and even though there is something set up, there's no real reason for me to get invested. She is part of the reason that I think that Alan Walker hard carried so much, because there are so many characters here that are archetypes, but there's nothing there when it comes to a distinct personality, and she is part of this problem. But there's a cool fun fact when it comes to her character bio, where we find out that she might have actually been created before Alan Walker, which that is something to appreciate when it comes to her character. And it's, like I said, it's just a fun fact though, so it's nothing too significant. Konda is another character that I absolutely do not like at all. I've already talked about him a little bit. He is very much an archetype. There's nothing distinct about him at all. He's a very cold-hearted character that's obviously cold-hearted with good intentions, because he cares about the other exorcists, or at least that's my theory for now, because he's obviously gone through some significant loss. But I do think his character bio is pretty funny. He is Japanese, but when it comes to like his favorite foods and just other aspects of his character bio, it kind of seems like that scene from Naruto where he's like, I don't particularly like anything. It reads exactly like this. His favorite food is something super basic, but he doesn't like just too many things to mention. That's what it says in his bio. So he is very much just that archetypical character, nothing real distinct about him, but hopefully there's something there in the future, because there's not much there now. Lavi is the obvious fan favorite for so many different reasons. He has a fun personality, and I do think that he is just very distinct when it comes to the rest of the cast. So he is very much the exception when it comes to the entire Black Order, in my opinion, and this is for a very good reason. In his character bio, the author states that he was kind of a main character for another series that she was writing, but instead of keeping him there, she brought him here, and I think that's why he feels so different. Like, it's almost like he belongs in another series. It's kind of crazy. So there's a lot to appreciate with him over so many, pretty much all of the other characters. And now I'm starting to make myself look a little bit foolish, because up next is Miranda Lotto, a character that I really enjoyed and I didn't exactly expect to see come back as an exorcist, and apparently the author felt the same way, because she stated the exact same thing in Miranda's character bio. Now, if you don't remember who Miranda Lotto is, or you haven't seen the series, this is a bit of a spoiler, but after the Rewinding City arc, she does end up becoming an exorcist, and I think she's one of the best characters within that entire organization. And then lastly is Aristar Croy III, and this is the vampire, and the author mentions in the character bio that she really wanted to see a vampire exorcist, and I can agree at least a little bit. He's one of the more interesting ones. I'd put him above characters like Konda and Lena Lee, basically all the characters that we get introduced early on in the story. So he's one of my favorites, I guess, but there's a significant difference between him, Lavi, and Miranda as compared to the likes of the main character, Alan Walker. So there's some significant works that needs to be done when it comes to the side characters, but there is potential here, and I do think that Aristar Croy III is a part of that significant potential. But that is pretty much it when it comes to the Exorcist, the Black Order. Now on to the Noah family. Luckily, there's only two that I have to talk about. The first being Road Camelot, a character that I do not like at all. I do not think this antagonist has really anything going for them. In fact, it took me a while to figure out if it was a boy or a girl. I had to Google it, and it is in fact a woman, but she is incredibly annoying. She falls within an archetype that I do consider just one of the worst out there, so there's not a lot going for her in terms of my eyes and how I see her potential. But yeah, that's pretty much it, because I do not like her character at all, and I'm not looking forward to her ever showing up in the series. Pretty much any other member of the Noah family I'd rather see on screen than her. But of course, the coolest one that we've seen so far is the one with the most difficult pronunciation, so expect this to be butchered. It is Tiki Mick. Like I said, I do not think I landed that at all. You're more than welcome to make fun of me for it. But he was absolutely fantastic for the very short amount of time that he showed up. He only showed up in the final arc, and there was, or at least the final arc that I read, but there was so much presence to his character, and there's so much potential to be had here. He plays a very crucial role in terms of the climax, in terms of where I left off at the end of the Fallen arc, and there's just so much I could talk about his character with, or character for. I'm not sure if I phrased that right, but I'm not going to, because that is just way too spoilery, and I'd be more than happy to get into his character in terms of later videos. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to talk about when it comes to D.Gray-Man, and pretty much all the aspects within it that were really interesting to me. But I will go ahead and let you guys know I do have a couple of videos planned on the way. I think I'm going to do 20th Century Boys next, so that's going to take the highest priority. And then there's other series like Boruto, which I'm giving another chance, and I have given another chance. I have a video pretty much on the back burner when it comes to that one. Blue Exorcist, I'm also very much into making a video for, and there's just a couple that I do have my eyes set on, so expect videos in the future. I can't promise any timelines and stuff like that, college, being a dad, stuff like that, but hopefully you guys will be patient with me. Just thank you so much. I have over 1,000 subs, which is super awesome. It's something that I did strive for a long time, so hopefully you guys will keep supporting and we will keep growing. But thank you guys for watching, and I'm out.